Did the early church muzzle the canon? The question, I think, is did the early church suppress certain books from being in the canon? And of course, that's kind of in the popular media. That's what people think happened. They think there's secret manuscripts in the Vatican and this sort of thing that they know would destroy the Christian faith. This kind of stuff. Anytime you're dealing with a group that has some things that are not completely self-evident, then we tend to come up with conspiracy theories. The ancient church did not muzzle the canon. What they did was they had essentially three criteria for determining what was Scripture. The first is, and the most important, is apostolicity. Was it written by an apostle or an associate of an apostle? Now, when you take that criterion by itself, you exclude all 2nd century and later documents. Some people say, well, the Gospel of Thomas, that should go in the New Testament. Well, no one thinks Thomas wrote the Gospel of Thomas, and virtually everyone agrees it's a 2nd century document. I think it was written between 120 and 140. There's some who date it significantly later, some who date a little bit earlier. The Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Peter, the Apocalypse of Peter, the Acts of Peter. You've got all these documents out there, other letters by Peter that don't go in the New Testament. And why not? Because the ancient church said, these don't look like they're 1st century documents. The Shepherd of Hermas is an ancient document that was very well received in the church. It was considered to be orthodox. Churches all over the place accepted it. But it was written in the middle of the 2nd century by the brother of the Pope, apparently. And we have what's known as the Muratorian fragment, or Muratorian canon, that's written about AD 180. And it lists the books that were authorized to be read publicly in church services. And it talks about the Shepherd of Hermas. And it says, this is good reading, do it privately, but it doesn't belong in authoritative church service worship because it was written recently in our own time in Rome. Well, those kinds of things are very significant. So it's not just heretical books, but even orthodox books that didn't make it into the canon because they didn't pass the test of apostolicity. So the first question I ask is, when was this thing written? When the Gospel of Judas came out. Nobody thought Judas wrote that. In fact, you'd probably be fairly insane if you did. Nobody thought it went back to the 1st century. Everybody knows it's a Gnostic document. Does it qualify? Of course not. It's a later document. It's not written in the 1st century and all the rest. The second canon is Catholicity, and that is, does it fit in with the views of the universal church? Catholicity doesn't mean Roman Catholic, but the churches in the ancient world, did they generally accept this document or not? There were some that were slow to get accepted. 2 Peter was especially slow in getting accepted. They weren't sure if that was written by Peter. And part of the reason for this is that there's so many documents that we have in the ancient world that were allegedly by Peter. The church got a little bit skeptical, and it took them some time to accept 2 Peter. It didn't take them time to accept 1 Peter, but 2 Peter took a lot longer. Then the third criterion is orthodoxy. Does this book conform to what we know to be orthodox? And how do you know what's orthodox? Is it a circular argument? Well, no, we have the words of Jesus, so that even the words of Jesus probably were accepted as authoritative, even though the Gospels they were written in, it took some time before the church accepted those as authoritative and canonical. They just accepted the words of Jesus originally. And then there were hymns, there were creeds, there was the oral tradition that would passed on from generation to generation that established what orthodoxy was. There were eyewitnesses. Even Papias in the early 2nd century talks about speaking to people who were eyewitnesses. And so he's telling us about what orthodoxy was at that time. So apostolicity, Catholicity, orthodoxy were the three criteria the ancient church used. Those are the three criteria I think we should use today. The ancient church did not, in any sense, muzzle the canon.